Taking a look at Chelsea, the latest club under the scrutiny of the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules after Nottingham Forest and Everton have both taken points deductions. CBS's own James Benge is taking a look at their financial situation for a piece on CBSSports.com, and it shows Chelsea will need to make some player sales just to be compliant for next year's accounts, and that's even before making any new signings to bolster the squad in the upcoming summer transfer window. And for more on this story, let's bring in the writer of this piece, James Benge. And James, what did you discover in reporting out this piece in terms of the situation that Chelsea find themselves in financially?
Hi, Chris. Yeah, it was a fascinating examination. We had some independent projections on Chelsea's numbers, and we should emphasise, these are projections. A lot can change, but their numbers and their financial position for 2023-24 and for 2024-25, so next season. And our findings were that in both those seasons, they need an extra £100 million in revenue just to be compliant with the Premier League's PSR regulations. Now, this season in particular, that's going to almost certainly mean that's going to have to come from player sales. And look, there are players on the books that we expect to be sold, Ian Matson, Conor Gallagher, players like that mean they could deliver that £100 million in revenue. But I think we have to understand that the pressure is on them to do that next season as well, even if, and I know that Chelsea fans will pull me up on this, even if they get their Club World Cup money, our projection included them registering all their Club World Cup money that they will earn for the tournament next year in the 24-25 books, and it included a season ticket price rise, which we do expect to come in the near future. So it is. The stakes are very high for Chelsea. It is important to say we are not predicting that they will not be PSR compliant. We are just sort of giving you a sense of the scale of what they need to do to comply with the rules as they are right now.
James, PSR compliant, you just said, profit and sustainability. We've heard what's happened to Everton. Then it was Nottingham Forest. There's all the conversation around Manchester City that's been rolling for a long time. I think maybe if we just roll it back a second, and if you can explain to us what exactly PSR means and what those rules are and how they apply.
Yeah, so the profit and sustainability rules, kind of as ever when we start sort of getting into these nine-figure sums, they probably feel more complicated than they are. In effect, Premier League clubs agreed some time ago that over any 3-year cycle, they could not lose more than £105 million. Now, without wishing to overcomplicate things, that number can be a bit higher because there are certain things, for instance, women's football, academy football, that you can sort of deduct from your PSR calculations. But basically, it's an agreement not to lose loads of money chasing success or just throwing money down the drain. Everton were handed a initial 10-point penalty that was subsequently cut on appeal for breaching PSR rules, and they are currently facing another PSR case. Nottingham Forest have been handed a 4-point penalty. We should say that for the most recent set of PSR calculations, which are relating to last season, Chelsea were fine. But our projections and our analysis suggests they might have been quite close to the line, but they were within the limits. The challenge Chelsea are going to have is that they have these sizable costs on their books relating to the signings they've made over the past 18 months, and that's going to almost every year for some time now, it's going to make it very hard for them to maintain sustainability without selling players.
Now, the interesting thing is that Chelsea embarked on a strategy of buying all these young players. The footballing world learned of the word amortization because they would sign these players to 8.5-year contracts and spread the money out. And it appeared for the moment that Chelsea had figured something out about the financial system. They found some kind of loophole. How have we gotten to a place where they spent all this money thinking that they had figured the rules out, where now all of a sudden they're up against it, having not figured the rules out?
Yeah, amortization is the key word here. And again, to briefly explain, when a football club buys a player, they view it in accounting terms as buying an asset. So they will spread the cost of that transfer fee over that time. So Wesley Fofana, let's take an example, and I'm going to simplify this, but Wesley Fofana was bought for 80 million euros. Let's say he was given an 8-year contract. In football accountancy terms, the club would register that as 10 million of expenditure every year. Now, like you say, Chris, that kind of meant that in year one, when they were buying all these players for crazy sums, that actually when you sort of looked on the balance sheet, it said, oh, they're only committing £160 million. The issue is that they're going to be committing £160 million for the foreseeable future every year before they buy anyone else. And that has to be covered. And the one thing I would say is, we've talked about PSR, those rules may change to be more in line with UEFA's squad cost control rules. Those will include amortization as well. So there's a sort of £160 million on Chelsea's books that's only going to really trickle away towards the end of the decade. It's a sort of huge drag on expenditure, on development, on growth. It would all have worked out a bit more effectively if Chelsea had sort of built a Champions League squad with this. And kind of the way out of this for Chelsea is to qualify for the Champions League every year and, ideally win the thing, because that's always worth a lot of money. But at the moment, they have a squad that is mid-table in the Premier League. Underlying metrics say it's maybe the 5th, 6th best squad in the league. You need to, with all the money you spent, you need to be sort of a lock for Champions League football. And I'm not sure that's guaranteed, especially if, squad players, good starters like Conor Gallagher go in the summer.
I just want to pick up on that, actually, because, 2 years in a row, no European football, and you look at that table and you're like, what, Chelsea are mid-table? They've got to sell players to avoid the breach, to avoid this potential points deduction, but then they've got to try and get European football, which you were talking about, challenge in the Premier League, which is also incredibly important for them in terms of bringing in revenue. How big of an impact is this? Never mind the potential points deduction down the line, but with what they actually have to do now, James.
Next year there's a window. A lot of the players that I've sort of mentioned in the piece that could be sold, Maatsen, Lukaku, Trevor Chalobah, they're not necessarily first team starters. The challenge will be that you'll lose a lot of your depth, maybe, because you'll want to sell substitutes as well, an Armando Broja, fringe players. You'll lose that depth, but you'll be able to keep your starters. And so maybe that if you can scramble into the Champions League, then that means that for 25, 26, the books look a little bit rosier. But I think what it does is just ratchet up the pressure and the demands for immediate results. And you can't strengthen the squad that easily to get you there. You could, of course, sell more players, sell more academy graduates to cover the PSR hole and then give you some more wiggle room. But it's a fine line to tread to get better while selling players, even when you have a young squad and you're hoping that next season it's not as ravaged by injuries. Because one thing we have to say is Chelsea have had a horrible season injury-wise.
True. James, let's get into the fans a little bit and the reaction that's actually going on, at Chelsea at the moment in and around London. You've got Todd Bowley in. It's almost like the fans kind of lauding up Roman Abramovich, but we have to remember that Todd Bowley took over, some of the problems that he left behind. Do you think it's fair what the fans are taking him to task about, because there seems to be this backlash? Do you think it's, I'd love to know more about what the conversation is within the fans at Chelsea.
Yeah, it's tough and it's riven, and we can see this even not just kind of the usual that you'll see on social media where big club fan bases can argue about anything. Major supporters bodies are arguing with each other publicly. The Chelsea Supporters Trust last week publicly criticised the chief executives and the ownership for their lack of engagement with the fans. The Chelsea Fan Advisory Board subsequently said, actually, ownership is more engaged and more in dialogue with us than it was under Roman Abramovich. But the real challenge that you've hit on there is that there's this sort of culture clash. Roman Abramovich ran this football club with making money at the bottom of his list of priorities. It was a football club that lost £900,000 a week. And even this venture capital firm that's done something quite strange and surprising and loaded lots of long-term costs onto Chelsea's book is never going to sort of run it as a patronage system. Roman Abramovich spends his money on Chelsea because it makes him look good and he has fun winning trophies. That's never going to be the Clear Lake model. And it is a culture clash. And, I think Chelsea fans have got very used to turbulence and drama, but I think there's sort of been an implicit contract with the previous ownership that I will deliver you turbulence and drama, and don't get attached to any of the managers because they won't last more than a year or two, but they'll bring you trophies anyway. And not competing for trophies, we have to say they got to the League Cup final, and they may well get to the FA Cup final. But, you know, the expectation are sky high at Chelsea, and it's going to be and has been a real culture shock for supporters to adapt to an ownership that can't just, and also just an ecosystem with PSR where you can't just throw money at a problem and expect it to go away.
Yeah, the Abramovich days.
Right. I almost wonder if even if Abramovich were still the owner, they might still be running into these problems.
Absolutely, because like James was just talking about, he was doing it because he had a Premier League club. And
right.
He loved that.
And he loved that it won all the time.
Absolutely.
And managers be gone as long as we keep winning things. But James Benge, it's a great story on CBSSports.com. Plenty of depth on this situation around Chelsea. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.